Unfortunately, if you've been a fan of Arctic Cat in the past, it's been rather hard to remain loyal to the brand over the last several years. Due to ownership changes, first to Textron, which has now turned it over to partner company Tracker Off-Road, but still offers a couple models under the Arctic Cat name under Textron's banner.
I know, it's very confusing who actually makes these anymore, and that confusion can bring about a certain foreboding uncertainty as far as where Arctic Cat's future lies.
Combine that with the fact that most of their models have really gone unchanged for going on 7 years now, it can be easy to see how the brand is struggling. So much so that I'm afraid unless Arctic Cat goes through some major upgrades with both their machines and business practices, it might not be long before they completely fade from the market altogether.
Now, I've said all that to say this. Having owned this Wildcat trail this past year, I've really come to fall in love with Arctic Cat, and more specifically, their smallest side-by-side.
You guys know me. I have an infinity for 50-inch side-by-sides that was born out of my ownership of the Pioneer 500. They are just so nimble and maneuverable in the woods that they are the perfect fit for the trails I ride daily. However, the Wildcat trail brought something new with it the Pioneer 500 could never dream of bringing. Sportiness. The Wildcat Trail 700 class twin-cylinder power plant pushes out around 65 horsepower, which sure doesn't sound like much by today's standards, but keep in mind, the trail has a dry weight of only 990 pounds, which gives it a power-to-weight ratio of around 0.065 horsepower per pound. Again, that may not seem like an impressive number, but for comparison, my R-Max 1004 with its 108 horsepower power plant, but heavy 2,000 pound weight, only gives it a power of weight ratio of around 0.054 horsepower per pound. To put it simply, my Wildcat trail will hands down stomp my R-Max in an all-out race all day long.
Remember, the Wildcat Trail was designed with the sole purpose of knocking out the Razor 800 as reigning champion. And when it was released in 2014, it did just that.
With a lightning quick and very respectable 2.89 seconds 0 to 30, you would believe the Wildcat has a lot bigger power plant in it than what it does. And that lightning fast acceleration, when combined with excellent handling for a 50-inch machine thanks to front and rear sway bars that make it really stable around turns, we are able to rip around the short course with a 39.72 second lap, one of the fastest we've tested. And although you're probably not going to tow much with a Wildcat trail, it is rated to tow 1,500 pounds, and in low range it managed to pull this 1,100 pound trailer up this 5% grade for 300 feet in 10.51 seconds. Which was only 2.74 seconds slower than the 7.77 second run up the same exact grade for the same distance without the trailer.
And even today, a whopping 7 years later, this little Wildcat Trail still holds its own on the trails and is a blast to ride.
Gear selection is smooth through the floor-mounted shifter, and clutch engagement with the standard equipped Team Rapid Response clutch is crisp and smooth without being overly herky-jerky. Power comes on quick and is always on tap for when you feel the need to slide around a corner or to power up a hill climb. As far as ride comfort, the Wildcat Trail boasts 10 inches of suspension travel up front and 10.5 inches of suspension travel in the rear, which is still class leading for a 50-inch side-by-side even today. This travel ties the newer and more modern Can-Am Maverick Trail's 10 front, 10.5 rear, and still managed to beat the brand spanking new 2022 Razor Trail suspension travel that only specs out at 10 inches of travel front and rear. With Fox monotube preload adjustable shocks, ride is decent for such a narrow machine, but when pushed hard through rough sections or rocky terrain, it will buck and throw you around a bit. Larger tires, like the 28-inch Carnivores I've ran on my Wildcat Trail at times, with a bit less air pressure is a definite plus to gain a more plush ride. Bigger tires are also a big help in getting the Wildcat off the ground, as its 10 inches of ground clearance is not awful, But when combined with its fairly long 85-inch wheelbase, it means you're going to be riding the skid plate anytime you get into some technical terrain. But don't worry, should the inevitable happen, you get hung up on a rock or you get down deep into a mud hole and find you can't get through in two-wheel drive, then the Wildcat Trail has a tried and true four-wheel drive system where a push of a button goes from two-wheel drive to four-wheel drive. And if that doesn't work, then you have a fully lockable front differential that should definitely be enough to get you out of most situations.
Handling is superb for such a narrow machine. Simply put, you point the wheels in the direction you want to go, and this little guy goes there, no questions asked.
Front and rear sway bars combined with a low center of gravity keep the Wildcat Trail planted firmly in the corners when you're pushing the go pedal to the floor. I have played around with removing the front sway bar for more articulation and a slightly better ride, but found the benefits to handling with the sway bars were far better than the benefits to the ride quality without the bars, especially if you're the kind of driver who likes to push your machine to the edge.
Now, I've driven quite a few machines over the past several years, and this Wildcat Trail is one of the best handling machines I've ever ridden in, 50-inch or not.
As far as styling, you'll either love or hate the looks. This is one area that is always very subjective, but to me, the styling of the Wildcat still holds up. It's a machine that looks fast even when standing still. Its lines are sleek and aerodynamic, and its low profile makes you think you're in more of a race buggy than a trail machine. The hood is long, but because it cuts into such a skinny front grille, visibility is still great. The Trail has a decent-sized cargo area in the rear that's good for 300 pounds, and the clever design of the cage is meant to allow for easy entry and departure, which is nice because you really sit down low in the machine and have quite the step over the side to get in and out. However, it is something to mention that once you throw a roof on, the design of the cage really becomes irrelevant.
Now we come to my first real complaint about these Wildcat Trails. These doors have got to be the absolute worst in the industry. And the issue is that no matter how you adjust them, they just don't want to close right. Now this is the base Wildcat Trail, and it comes standard with just half doors, and the limited editions do come with full doors that may be better. Basically, every time you get in and out requires you, in order to get the door shut, to lift and then shut. You just can't slam them shut, otherwise they hit the latches. And the fact that my Trail has these lower door inserts on, which are awesome at helping keeping debris from flying in at you, that's just even more added weight to pull down on the half doors that cause them to sag even worse. And add to that, the fact that it takes a good hard slam to get them to shut, otherwise they're not going to latch. And getting in and out can be a real nuisance. I actually had the misfortune shortly after buying this guy of not getting the passenger door closed, and I was out, playing in the snow, ripping, cutting donuts, and I actually had the passenger side door fly open, get caught in the deep snow, and completely bent up to where I had to replace the whole frame. So, unless you're cheap like me and can just put up with these cheap doors, I would recommend getting some full one-piece doors.
Moving to the interior, this is where the Wildcat Trail really shows its age and the fact that it's remained unchanged since its debut in 2014. The dash is just one big mass of plastic. You do get a small storage space on the passenger side, but you can't even call that space a glove box because for whatever reason, you get this net instead of a door. But it is a ridiculous feature and it just simply should come with a door. The display is about as basic as you can get, but is very functional for what it is and does allow you to see a good variety of info. It's also customizable to some degree by giving you 3 parameters that you can select various gauges for.
The steering wheel is tilt adjustable. However, once you fire up the engine, this thing has more rattles than an X3 suspension has squeaks. Now, although it is a noisy little wheel, it is comfy and easy to grip for more spirited driving. However, with the amount of flex you have in it, it does feel a little on the cheap side.
The seats are comfy, and I've had no issues with them on all-day rides. Again, you sit down in the Wildcat, meaning your legs are more out in front of you. And I think on average most people find this a more comfortable seating position than sitting upright like in a utility side-by-sides with your legs bent more under you like you would be sitting in a typical chair. There is a nice footrest for your left leg, but it does put your knee right up against the door. The door does have a rubber pad to rest your knee against, which is a thoughtful gesture, but to be honest, it's on the hard side, and after an hour or so of riding, you feel it in your knee anyway. One of the most clever features they've included in the floor is this little footrest for your heel. This puts the gas pedal in the perfect position, and I would contest that this is the most comfortable pedal position I've ever experienced in any side-by-side to this day. This little rest gives you just the right amount of support to give you great control over throttle input, and it also keeps your foot planted so it's not bouncing on the pedal and giving you unwanted surges in power as you rip down the trail. Passengers have a fair amount of legroom and a footrest for the right leg. However, for them to stretch out forces their feet into this little pocket on the left towards the middle of the machine, which makes for an awkward position to set in for very long.
Finally, despite this being a narrower 50-inch machine, there is a lot of shoulder room between you and your passengers. However, if you are a broader shouldered person, you probably will end up rubbing up against the door.
Cab heat while riding is noticeable but not awful. Obviously, having a full windshield will make it worse as you lose airflow to carry that heat away, but that's true with any side-by-side. People tend to really complain about cab heat nowadays, and this is a pet peeve of mine. Side-by-sides are off-road vehicles designed to be compact and rugged and used, well, off-road. That means there isn't much between you and the engine, and that's just part of the off-road life. They're not luxury cars. To me, complaining about the cab heat in a side-by-side would be just like going to the gym and complaining about the weights being too heavy. You don't want the weights to be heavy? Then don't go to the gym. You don't want a little bit of cab heat in your side-by-side? Go buy a Jeep. Stop complaining and just enjoy the thrill of ripping on your favorite trails with little between you and the great outdoors. Routine maintenance on the Wildcat Trail is easy for the at-home mechanic to perform. The air filter is located behind the engine and has open access from the rear. It takes only seconds to unclip the lid and pull the filter for cleaning. Simple as that. There is also a pre-filter for the airbox and CVT intakes that's located just behind the driver's side door, which is easy to remove as well with just a couple push rivets. Checking the oil is also easy as it simply involves removing the center panel between the seats with a simple twist of a clip and popping it off. The dipstick as well as the oil filter is right behind it and easy to get to. As with all rear engine side-by-sides, the CVT case is located right behind the rear driver's side tire, and should the unfortunate happen where you blow a belt out on the trail, it's not too bad of a job to replace, provided you carry some basic tools with you to do it. The battery is located under the passenger side seat, which is easy to take off with one hand in a matter of seconds. And a couple screws and that little plastic cover on top of the battery comes off, and you also have access to your fuel pump right there, easy if you ever have to service it. Access under the hood is also super easy, even with the installed Wildcat windshield here, although there isn't much under there besides the radiator, the coolant reservoir, and the brake tank. Of course, I mounted my winch solenoid there, but other than that, nothing much.
I've had this Wildcat Trail for going on a year now, having bought it used with 200 miles. Now that the odometer reads a little over 700 miles, what problems have I had with it? Well, aside from the dreaded door shutting issues, the only main issue I've had was the stock A-arm bushings were shot right around 600 miles.
The Wildcat uses brass for their bushings, and they wear very quickly due to being a softer metal. Now, this is a common issue that plagues all Wildcat models, so be prepared to replace them sooner rather than later. Now, I went with Garage Products bushings as my research showed them to be about the best you can get, and replacing the bushings can be easily done as a weekend project.
And also, due to the fact that this has a CVT system that doesn't keep the belt engaged, there is no engine braking on this buggy, which means in that 700 miles, I've also pretty much blown through an entire set of brake pads. There are some other known issues with these Wildcat trails that seem to have been taken care of with the later models like my 2019, but I do feel like I should still mention them just so you know about them.
First off, because the Wildcat Trail is such a small and compact machine, there isn't a whole lot of clearance between the header pipe and the back of the firewall behind the passenger seats. So what this means is as you're running your machine, it's getting up to temperature, that header pipe is throwing off heat. It would actually be enough to melt the firewall behind the passenger seat. Now this plagued quite a few number of machines, so much so that Arctic Cat actually had filed a recall for it, in which they added more insulation to the back of the firewall, and that seemed to have taken care of the issue. Engine mounts were known to break from excess vibration. Installing J-hooks to reinforce the engine mounts was found to be a cheap and durable remedy for this. Wheel bearings would wear out quickly if not greased regularly, which does require purchasing a wheel bearing grease tool and removal of the wheel and axles. Not a big deal, but time consuming and an added step for routine maintenance. I've also seen many reports of the primary CVT getting hung up, especially if the machine has sat for a while, due to the slider towers being tight against the sheave and not allowing the sheave to slide freely. This seems to be an easy fix with some light sanding on the slider towers for just a little extra clearance.
So, let's get down to the big question. Is the Wildcat Trail worth buying? Here's a couple things to consider.
First and foremost is the fact that as of 2020, the Wildcat Trail has been discontinued with no immediate plans for it to return in the foreseeable future. So what does that mean as far as parts availability in the future? That's hard to predict, but there are enough Wildcats still out there on the trails that I would guess you'll still be able to get parts for quite a while yet. They also share a lot of regular maintenance parts with other Arctic Cat machines that are still in production, so all should be safe on that front. Second, even though the Wildcat Trail is no longer in production, there are a good circulation of used ones on the market, and compared to the drastic inflation of prices we've seen with all things powered by gas, you can still pick up a Wildcat Trail at a fairly reasonable price. For what you get, that makes them a very attractive machine for anyone in the market for a side-by-side on a tight budget.
Yes, it's old, it's outdated. Yes, it has its little quirks as all machines do. But in the end, I believe the Wildcat Trail is still one of the best 50-inch side-by-sides you can buy. And probably the best if you're on a tighter budget and want something a little sportier than a Pioneer 500.
For its size and intended purpose, it handles great, is comfy enough to ride all day, has fantastic power, and not to mention the sound of it ripping down the trail is unlike any other machine.
I said earlier that it looks fast even when stopped, but it just downright sounds fast when that tailpipe starts singing as you hit that go pedal.
So is the Wildcat Trail still worth buying? Yes. Yes, it is. I think it's a shame Arctic Cat no longer offers it, and I sincerely hope they consider bringing it back in the near future. I think the only updates it would really need is some interior love, such as a more modern steering wheel mounted display, a far better door design, and a better shock such as a Fox QS3 would be a benefit as well. I think with little changes like this, it would still be a strong competitor in the 50-inch market today. With Arctic Cat's future in question, it's really hard to say what lies ahead for the Wildcat Trail. It does seem like they are at least trying to put a little more effort into the brand as a whole than they have over the last couple years, and that is a promising sign. I want to know what your thoughts are on the Wildcat Trail, as well as your thoughts on Arctic Cat as a whole. You think they have a chance of revival? Or do you think they've just gotten too comfy with the status quo and will fall short in bringing the new innovations the brand needs to bring in order to survive? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for stopping in to hear my thoughts on the Wildcat Trail, and until I see you again, keep on riding.